People who have snapped on a bully at school. What's your story? Story 1, 5th grade. This dude who always picked on me was kicking my seat in a assembly, and I was having a terrible week and this was my last straw. I turned, punched him in the face, but I wasn't satisfied with the first punch because it felt weak. So I figured I'm already going to be in trouble, so I went back for a second better punch that felt worth getting in trouble over. Also, this was a DARE assembly, which was about saying no to drugs and violence, so I basically learned nothing. Story 2. For context, I'm 6'5", and have been since high school. There was a girl I was friends with who had a boyfriend. There was nothing going on between us, but her boyfriend was older and used to call me names and throw at me in the halls. I'm not a particularly confrontational person, so I let it go on like that for a while. There was a day when he knocked my books out of my hand and I had had enough. He wasn't nearly as big as I was, so I picked him up by his shirt and slammed him against a locker. The bullying stopped. Edit. A word. Story 3. My second in France, like 15 years old, bully decided to sit next to me in class, repeatedly whispered insults to me, and at one point I snapped, took his head, and bashed it into the desk. I think I would have been in deep had his textbook not been there. Needless to say, I got kicked out of that class and had to change English group. Story 4. 6th grade. A few days before end of school year. Beat his, and didn't stop even with teachers saying so. The bully stopped, but I was sick and tired of his. Lucky me, I didn't have to come in for those remaining 3 days. Best of all was that my parents were on my side. Story 5. Beat mine with a hockey stick one day after school. We were playing road hockey. He lived down the street. He just kept going, and to be honest, I saw red. I just remember my dad pulling me off while I was slamming my wooden goalie stick into his side while he tried to cover his bleeding face. His parents never perused anything. My parents took me to counseling. He ended up nearly killing his best friend in a drinking and driving accident. Friend was never the same, permanently injured. Bully killed himself a few years later after he didn't make a junior hockey team. I still feel bad. I have never been in any violent interaction before or since. Now, as an adult and an educator, I know he was likely really hurting. I am sorry, Justin. Edit. Thank you to everyone for the messages and for opening up with your own stories. The only way we improve as a greater community is to role model how to be human. And that includes mistakes, regrets, and sorrow as much as it includes success, celebrations, and happiness. Keep sharing it all. We all learn from our shared stories. To those who sent me direct messages about their struggles, I promise you I will respond to every one of them by tomorrow. To anyone else reading this, I always respond to personal messages. So feel free if you want someone to chat with. If you're struggling with any thoughts of serious self-harm, please call your local suicide helpline. I've used them before. It does help, even if it's just a little. Keep taking care of each other, everyone. It takes little effort to be kind. Story 6. I was being bullied for like a month when I was 13 or 14. Some guy from my class started messing with me, pushing, hair grabbing, neck slapping, stuff like that, and I didn't know how to handle it. One of his friends from another class, a guy I had never spoken to before, tried it once and I instinctively punched him in the face. Bullying stopped. If that random guy didn't do what he did, I don't know how I would have put an end to it, to be honest. Story 7. In 4th grade, this kid named Nick used to punch me every day at recess. I went home one day crying about it, and my dad told me to punch him back. So the next day when Nick came around to punch me, I whipped around and just beat the snot out of him. Absolutely wailed on him. One of the teachers noticed and took us to the principal's office, and we got off with warnings. After that, Nick never punched me again, but would make sure I could get to the front of the line for the drinking fountain and picked me first for any sports game he was team captain for. Story 8. I was 7 and I was a nice kid with average grades and this one bully that was taller than me. He used to be any typical bully like trip you on your lunch and push your head for no apparent reason. I was getting annoyed that I felt the red heat go all over my body. I looked at him and told him to stop. I looked at him, he pushes me to the ground. I stop and kicked his tables and punched his nose with all my force. His nose started to bleed and I was sent to the office. My mom had this thing where if they started it, then she'll pretend that she's mad at me at school and come home saying congrats. Edit. Thanks for the stranger who gave me the silver medal. Have a nice day. Story 9. I had been bullied all year long by this guy, and it was the last week of 8th or 9th grade. Comes up to me and says something about my clothes or something. and I just saw red. I turned around and hit him with a palm strike to the face. The bottom of my hand connected right under his nose. He doubled over and I bolted. I heard later his lip got stuck in his braces and he had to go to the doctor to fix it. I got a stern talking to about not hitting people, although my teachers were aware of the verbal bullying. Story 10. I didn't snap a bully, but I did snap at a teacher who didn't do anything, no matter how many times I told her I was being bullied. All my bullies, their parents were on the parent council, they got funding for field trips and things like that, so the kids were basically untouchable. I yelled at the teacher, telling her what they have done to me. Things like taking my school supplies, excluding me from activities, calling me names and throwing things at me, along with other things. I told him how I was sick and tired of being blamed, that it was my fault I had no friends when every single bully told people to avoid me. They invented this thing called the Katie touch. Like the cheese touch, but you could get the Katie touch if you talked to me. And I finished it by telling her that she was stupid and was too worried about losing school funding that she didn't care what happened to her students. No one backed me up and nothing changed. I got a 3-day in-school suspension and the bullying got worse. Kids would take my lunch and shoes, so I'd get in trouble for not wearing my indoor shoes, and I passed out one time from hunger and dehydration from not eating. I hated that school, and I'm so glad I went to a junior high that didn't have anyone else there from my old elementary. To all teachers, just because a kid is always playing by themselves, it doesn't mean they like it that way. Also, if a kid tells you they are being bullied, then do something about it. Story 11. Couple of bullies like to do monkey in the middle with me. Didn't take me long to figure out the solution was to simple tackle one of the bullies and start punching. Story 12. I was severely bullied from my earliest memory all the way through high school. The times I remember snapping were these. 3rd grade, we were putting the chairs upside down onto the desks at the end of the day, and this kid kept pushing my chair and pushing me. I turned around and shoved him as hard as I could with both hands, and he fell onto the desk behind him. The chair fell off. He fell off onto the chair, and I got in trouble. 4th grade, at some Boy Scout thing, and there were sodas. I got one out of the cooler, and a kid who bullied me a lot grabbed it out of my hand and walked away. I grabbed another one and threw it at the back of his head. Got in trouble, of course. 7th or 8th grade, after being bullied incessantly, I lost it and was crying and screaming and punching the lockers and got in trouble for denting a couple of them. 9th or 10th grade, while on the bus, one of the bullies grabbed my comb out of my back pocket. He'd messed with me a lot. Rather than punching, for some reason I used my open hand to slap him really hard on top of his head. He was seated and I was standing in the aisle. He complained of his neck hurting from it and I got in trouble. Between each of these instances, I'd put up with constant bullying every day and do nothing, and no teachers gave a. Bullies got away with bullying all the time, but even if I simply said, "Leave me alone" with a loud voice, I was in trouble. It never made sense to me. Edit. I appreciate the empathy I've received from this post and want to clarify, I'm not the attention-seeking, intentional victim type. Just answering OP's question and relaying my experiences. While I still have a ton of self-doubt, I'm doing pretty decently now. Took a fuckton of time and effort, though, LOL. Story 13. The bully would always grab my or slap my neck, say rude things about my nationality, and insult me. I often told him to stop that, but he never did, for a year and a half. Once, in a lecture, he came to my desk and grabbed my. I had a really bad day that day, too. The moment he grabbed my I saw red. I was mad. I stood up and looked him in the eye. I took his head and smashed it against the wall with all I had. Nothing serious happened to him, except for the teacher being mad at him for bothering me. I was a quiet and good-hearted kid, and the teacher knew that. Edit. I'm a guy, and that wasn't even gay. Or maybe he was, but never admitted it. Story 14. In 5th grade, I saw the girl who bullied me getting picked on. Her mom died due to health complications, and someone was saying she died because she was too fat. Even though she picked on me every day, I still stuck up for her. She didn't thank me or anything. But I think after I did that, she was a little nicer to me. Story 15. A group of boys thought it was hilarious to keep our football and stop us from getting it back after it rolled towards them on the school field. They kept passing it between themselves and picking it up and trying to keep it away from us. After trying for about a minute to get the ball from them by running after it, one of them picked the ball up and kept moving it away, trying to keep it out of my reach. I took a few steps back, no longer interested in trying to not hurt them, and did a goal kick on the ball. I kicked his hand in the process and the ball smacked him in the face and gave him a nose. He didn't even try to react. He just turned and walked away with his tail between his legs. Story 16. I was 11, he was 9. But he beat up my 6-year-old sister on the bus home one day, and none of the adults would do anything about it. So after we got off the bus, I kicked his. He never bothered my sister or any other kid ever again. Story 17, 5th grade. Can't remember what specifically caused me to snap, but after spending the last 5 years being continually harassed, bullied, and assaulted by a specific boy, I'd had enough. I calmly walked to the mounted pencil sharpener at the back of the class and sharpened my pencil to a very fine tip. Then, I walked behind said bully, and in a downward motion slashed him across the entirety of his back in one fluid motion. Obviously, I got a truckload of for what I did. Principal insinuated to my mother that the parents of the other boy may want to press charges for my harming of their pride and joy. My mother, bless her heart, retorted back, "If that's the case, perhaps I should press charges considering how often my son has been coming home with cuts, bruises, and welts administered at their boy's hands without repercussions from your staff." The principal moonwalked out of that conversation so fucking fast. I still was read the riot act at home though. Got drilled into me that what I did was use a weapon to harm someone, and that it would never be tolerated at any level. Grounded for a very, very long time. Bully gave me space for a while anyway. Went back to his usual torment after a couple weeks, minus any physical contact. Story 18. High school. One girl made my life. I didn't even know her or fully understand why she targeted me. She tried to run me over and told cops I walked in front of her car. One day, walking up the stairs, she proceeded to taunt me, hitting me in the back with objects and calling me names. I stopped, turned around, and punched her in the nose. She landed on her back on the landing. I just stood over her and said, "What now?" She never said one word to me after that. Story 19. This was in 7th grade, I think. I threw a shoe at him in a change room. He was just picking on some random kid and I just had enough of his. And I completely missed him and hit the guy that he was picking on right in the face. Everyone froze for a second and then burst out into laughter. And the guy who was being picked on started crying, and I felt really bad because I meant to hit the bully. Shoes are hard to throw accurately, okay? I tried to tell him that it was for the bully, and I guess I calmed him down a little bit, also by apologizing profusely. After the incident, the mood in the change room was lightened, and everyone started being more chill with each other, so I guess it was a success, lol. Story 20. This happened in 8th grade. I was bullied from the beginning of 7th grade, and one day I decided to report him. I got bullied for reporting the bully. I got so mad that one day after church I beat him up in the parking lot. I made sure I didn't beat him up enough to have to call an ambulance, but enough to hurt. He didn't mess with me from then onwards. Story 21. In middle school, we were hanging around before classes started, and this guy who used to be my friend came up behind me and put a condom in my mouth. I turned around, pushed him up against the wall, and punched him in the face. The whole school heard about it, and they were all backing me up for the rest of the day. I didn't even get in trouble. Edit. Because I'm getting some upvotes, I'll expand a bit. He was super embarrassed and tried to negotiate with me saying, "You have to let me punch you back to make up for it, or save his honor, or some." People would not stop teasing him about it. I think that when the teachers heard about it, they thought it was funny, and I had a good rep with them, so they let it slide. Story 22. I was about 8 at the time. A group of boys at school gathered around me, formed a circle, and started pushing me around. I was a reserved and shy kid, and this was surprisingly the tipping point for me. I started yelling at each of them and asked them if bullying a defenseless girl made them feel cool. They backed off. I saw one of the boys alone in one of the washrooms, unisex sink area, and for the first time, he said hi and walked off. I'll never forget this day. Story 23. Was bullied in maybe 2nd grade. He kept pushing me and messing with me, so I just swung at him when I was sick of his. I sat his down, and he's left me alone since. I think we became friends later, I don't remember. Story 24. I wore glasses, so was bullied by every single bully in the school. Unfortunately for everyone who tried, they didn't realize me wearing glasses didn't also make me not be over 6 foot in grade school. So I got bullied a single time by every bully, and then never again. Story 25. I was in grade 9, had a French teacher who was a complete pushover. My friend and I were getting paper tossed at the backs of our heads by 3 popular guys' pal girls. I told the teacher what was happening. He turns to them. They stop, and he goes on his business. I go back to my seat, infuriated with the zero help I'm getting from the teacher, and to nobody's surprise, the papers begin to fly once again. So I stand up, knocking my chair back, Turn to the teacher, tell him, loudly, I'm going to the principal. Then, after storming to the door, I pause at it, turn to the popular squad and tell them, in front of the whole class who is staring at me, you are not getting away with this. Needless to say, they stopped after that. Even though I'm pretty sure the principal did nothing. Goes to show how tough bullies really are. All they want is someone who doesn't fight speak back. Story 26. When I was in the 7th grade, I got a 2-day suspension for fighting. We were playing kickball, and this one kid, Alexis, was being a reel with everyone. He was always into everyone, but he was being extra mean today, purposely trying to bean them as pitcher and running into them trying to knock them over when he was taking a base. I'm playing second base at one point and he runs into me like that knocks me back. He was pretty fat, so it was a hard hit. And I just lost it and got up and started throwing punches. The gym teacher came and broke us up right away and dragged us to the principal's office. The only thing he said to me was, "Man, you hit hard." And then he laughed. I'm lucky that it wasn't now because I would have probably gotten expelled, but I got off with just 2 days of suspension. I explained to my parents why I was fighting and they understood I was just standing up to an Story 27. So I grew up moving around a lot with mom and dad. Unfortunately, that meant being the new kid quite a bit. I was a pretty awkward kid, but I generally managed to make friends. Except one particular school, I was there for 3 years, which is the longest run at one elementary school I ever had. Anyways, the popular girls would bully me constantly. I was about 50 pounds soaking wet when I was younger and was on average skinnier than most. They would call me anorexic and ask why my parents starved me, etc. They didn't. My parents were and still are amazing. But one day the popular girl asked me to give her a push on the gliders. You'd hang onto a T-bar and push off from one butt platform to the next. Well, I pushed her, really hard, and she fell off and broke her arm. I transferred schools the next week. Story 28. This happened 6 years ago when I was in 5th grade and the bully was in 6th grade. I'd gotten to school a bit early and was just chilling on my phone when the bully came up and started ranting about how I couldn't be on my phone. Me. School hasn't even started yet. Besides, it's not your business, bully. I'll go tell a teacher and they'll take your phone away. Childish, I know. Me. They won't care. School hasn't started yet. Just go away. He then reached for my phone. He literally tried to take it. Of course I didn't let him. I was getting really frustrated and told him, again, to go away. He didn't. He decided it was a good idea to fucking punch me in the face. I wasn't ready at all, so I didn't even have time to put my arms up or anything. Just a first straight to the face. Now, I was a pretty small girl back then and the bully was a year older and apparently played a lot of sports and stuff. And on top of that, he was standing up and I was sitting down. I just snapped. Without even thinking, I just punched back as hard as I could. He just kind of stared at me before running off. I could literally hear him crying. He shouted at me that he'd tell a teacher, but no one mentioned it to me ever again and I never got in trouble. The bully didn't bother me even once after that. Story 29 year 7, so I was 12. Part of the bullying included this other girl being a sigh about getting into our lockers. She had the one next to me, and they were both on the ground, so we'd have to put our bags on the floor when we wanted to get into them. If she got there first, then I had to wait for her to finish before I could get to mine. But if I was there first, then she'd shove my bag out of the way and wouldn't be patient at all. It sounds unimportant now, but this wasn't the only thing that was going on. One day, she grabbed my bag and shoved it out of the way like normal and I snapped. I yelled at her, explaining exactly how she had been being unfair and that she needed to make a fucking decision on which way it was going to work and then stick to it. She and her friend literally had their mouths hanging open in shock, which is a sight I'll never forget, and the lockers stopped being an issue after that. She decided on patience rather than shoving bags out of the way. I just wish I'd lost my at the bullies more often. Maybe the rest of it would have stopped sooner. Story 30. My twin sister makes fun of me and doesn't stop. One time I had enough of her bullying and I told her if she didn't leave me alone I would strangle her. She still wouldn't leave me alone, so I attempted to pretend strangle her. I just grabbed her neck for a few seconds. It was enough to scare her and she ran away crying. We were about 9 or 10. Story 31. I was approached by 3 dudes I've never met in my life when I was 12, who then proceeded to bully me. One who looked like a dang, near carbon copy of Dudley Dursley, movie version, and 2 skinny minions. I was 70 pounds soaking wet and a tiny girl child, so Dursley smacked the frog I'd just caught out of my hands and squeezed it in front of me until its eyes began to swell. The other 2 jeering in the background. Sucks for him, though. I spent most of my childhood stomping through creeks, lifting up fallen tree logs bigger than ME like it's woodland CrossFit. I could pick up sewer covers by that age barehanded. I punched him in the nose so hard I heard the crack. Dursley and his cronies went all jaw-dropped before the dickhead threw the frog at my face for retaliation. It hit, but I caught it as it bounced off and booked. Never saw those shits again. TLDR, found myself amidst a YA novel with classic YA novel bullies. Edit. You guys are precious XD, great way to wake up this morning with everyone's replies in my inbox. The frog was fine, just a little stunned. I put him back in his home at the tiny brook that ran past the playground by my house, after I made sure he was okay. I was completely perplexed by that whole situation, like, what even was that? I've been teased before, but they were kids in my class, not random dudes off the street. Suffice to say that I never saw Dursley again after that. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Story 32. Ah yes, there was this one girl at our school who wasn't a bully. She was just mean as. Me and the mean girl were on and off friends until 7th grade. Then, she just started hating me for God knows what. On Kai K, she would tell me to kill myself and keep harassing me. Nobody out of the 3 other people in the group chat did anything about it. I finally had enough, and with permission from my parents, I went to school, waited for her until she got comfortable at her table, and then I went up and punched her in the face. She said later on it didn't even hurt, but she was crying when it happened. I hid in the bathrooms for the rest of morning period, then was suspended for 3 days. The girl who was harassing me wasn't in trouble because I couldn't provide screenshots of her saying it in the group chat. When I came back to school, I got so many high fives from other people that think she's mean, and they were cool with what I did. Story 33. It wasn't me, but a kid I knew in middle school would constantly get picked on by 2 other kids who would act like jerks, badger him, push him around. Well, one day they were messing with him, pushing him around, and calling him names. And he looks at one of the kids and calmly says, "If you push me one more time, I'm going to punch you in the face." The bully decided to push him again, and the kid turned and punched him square in the nose. The bully immediately started crying when he realized his nose was bleeding. He ran off with his friend to tell on the kid, even though they were bullying him in the first place. Everyone around him, including me, was cheering him on as he had stuck up for himself. Story 34. In 4th grade, Ronnie and Freddie kept ridiculing me, making remarks, teasing me at recess. I was raised to be peaceful and accommodating. I tried to ignore them, but it got under my skin. I decided to stay near the teacher at recess. They left me alone then, but I couldn't stay near the teacher all the time. They accused me of being teacher's pet. That bugged me even more. This went on for weeks. When recess was over, we lined up on the sidewalk to go back indoors. One day, Ronnie was right behind me. He started teasing me. I lost it. I took him down. When they pulled me off him, I was pounding his head against the pavement. Ronnie stopped teasing me. Noting the improvement, I challenged Freddie to a fight after school. A crowd gathered. It took only a few seconds for me to pin Freddie to the ground and force him to surrender. That ended the teasing from Freddie. A day or 2 later, my mother and I were called to the principal's office. My father was overseas in combat. Ronnie and his mother were there. I never knew where Ronnie's father was. As soon as the meeting started, Ronnie's mother launched into an indictment of me. Before she was finished, the principal cut her short. "Now let's hear the other side," she said. I stated my case. The principal heard me out, then said, "Gentlemen, don't fight. It's against the rules to fight on the school ground. I want you 2 to shake hands and apologize." I did as told. Ronnie had to be prompted to apologize, but that's not the end of it. Years later, in my early 20s, I had a job at a research institute at university. The institute director's beautiful young wife said to me, "A young man called Ronald J. was just hired. He says he beat you up in grade school." "That's not exactly how I remember it," I replied. "I'm not surprised," she said. A week later, there was a party at the director's house. Ronnie and I were there. Ronnie was slender, maybe 5'9". I was 6'4", about 195 pounds, ran 6 miles per day. The director's wife maneuvered Ronnie over to the group where I was and said, "Ronald, let's hear how you beat up Polanski in grade school." Ronnie mumbled something about a mistaken impression and left shortly afterward. He was careful to avoid me from then on. Sometime during the next year or so, I laughed and mentioned it to my mother. She said the principal had said to her, "I wish I had been there to see it when Polanski pounded Ronnie's head on the sidewalk." Story 35. In 5th grade, there was a kid who would relentlessly make fun of me, curse me out, shove, kick me, and more things I can't remember. One day, we had to run the mile for PE and he would speed up to me, get in the lane next to me, and shove or trip me. I headed to my next class, but we had a 10-minute break, with no teachers. I'm sitting in the courtyard of our school with other kids around reading. Then, we'll call him Kyle. Walks up, goes about his usual spiel of curses and such, and I begin to walk inside, just to go away. But no, Kyle wasn't done. As I'm walking to the door, Kyle jumps on my back, yelling in my ear, "Puss! Faye! E!" I grabbed his shoulder and proceeded to roll him off my back, then slam him into the dirt, knocking his breath out, and jumped on top of him, pinning his arms down. This all happened in about 3 seconds. Kyle didn't like that. Originally, I was just going to yell at him, but he didn't know when to quit. He tried to kick me, to which I grabbed his ankle and twisted it, telling him to stop. He didn't. He kept kicking. I drew back my arm and landed a hard punch to his mouth, loosening a tooth, which led to yelling from the kids behind us, who watched the whole time. Kyle began to cry, trying to punch me, to no avail. I swung again, but he moved his head, and my punch didn't hit its intended mark and hit him in the eye. He screamed. His eye was fine. He tried to knee me. Nope. I swung a final time, landing a solid crack to the bridge of his nose, bloodying it, but not breaking it. Then I felt hands on my shoulders. My friend pulled me off him BC a teacher had heard yelling and chanting of "fight" and other things. I stood up, unscathed, and proceeded to the office to be given 3 days suspension. Kyle is still in. Story 36. I stabbed him in the back of the neck with a pencil. 8th grade, I had been dealing with him whispering insults and ending up with spit and snot in my hair. The teacher switched our seating arrangement and I ended up behind him. He called me a stupid and I had it. I got him on the back of the neck with my pencil. So, yeah. Honestly, no clue where the courage came from. The bullying did stop. Story 37. Not at school, but I was 12, and a kid on my block constantly challenged me to fight him because he knew I didn't want to, so it was a great way for this chubby, incompetent brat to show off. One day, outside the convenience store, to his surprise, I accepted. He came towards me, and I basically just lifted up my leg and kicked him in the stomach. Honestly, he just bounced off my foot. In shock, he came at me again. This repeated about 3 times as the expression of disbelief on his face became more pathetically pronounced. He finally gave up and ran home past my house, telling my mother, who happened to be outside, that I beat him up. But she already knew about his behavior towards me, so as soon as I explained what happened, it was all good. He wasn't actually hurt physically, just emotionally. We both learned a good lesson that day, and he actually grew up to be a decent guy from what I could tell. Story 38. Not at school, but my friend, our neighbor, was screaming, and I heard her from across the street, so I ran over. We've all always walked in each other's places, BC. We were close, so I opened her door after she was telling her to let go of her hair, and he grabbed me by my throat and tossed me out of their house. I got up, grabbed an igloo cooler, and threw it through his house window. He came outside, and I proceeded to wail on him until he was snoring on the ground. I'm not even 5'3", 115 lbs, and he's a 6'0" guy. I've never knocked anyone out in my life, but I just snapped and went Incredible Hulk on him. I ended up with a broken hand, and he ended up with 3 broken windows and a broken face. He had to take off work for 2 weeks, went blind in his eye for a month, and the whites of his eye were red for at least a month or 2. It has been a year, and my knuckle still has problems, and his eye still looks black. Story 39. Had a girl who traumatized me from elementary school, all the way up to high school. She was the class pet and popular girl, so no one ever did anything, student or teacher. Didn't tell my parents as I didn't want to be seen as I'm a guy. Was riding my bike home my sophomore year of high school when this on her bike pops my fucking tires, making my bike flip over. It hurt as the sidewalk was that weird, sharp, bumpy cement. I got scratched up pretty good and all she did was laugh and call me a funny. This was my fucking breaking point and I had had enough of her bullshit. I was originally going to punch her, but I figured I'd get in trouble for that. So I did something that I knew would leave no physical marks. I got up from the ground, threw my bike helmet off, and stormed over to her. Considering I never fought back, this moment of aggressive approaching definitely freaked her out as her eyes widened to the size of grapefruits. "What are you doing?" she said, taking a few steps back. I raise my hand back, as if to slap her, and she closes her eyes. I found my opening, and I took it. Using both my hands, I grabbed her face and pulled it inches away from mine. I gave her a small, gentle kiss on the cheek and whispered softly, "See you tomorrow." I took my bike and walked off. For the rest of high school, she did nothing. She never got close to me. She didn't even look in my general direction. I felt proud of myself that the least harmful thing I could have done worked. Story 40. In 6th grade, fucking Tony and Brandon were talking about keeping the Men in Black VHS. I let Brandon borrow before the teacher got to class. Brandon went to the bathroom, so I told Tony I want my God Men in Black tape back. Tony told me to do something about it, so I fucking sucker punched him in the face. Tony tried to get up from those table chair desks we had, and I fucking blasted him again, and few more times. Fuck you, Tony. I want my God Men in Black VHS back, you son of a... And you, Brandon. My mom says I can't let anyone borrow VHS tapes anymore. Story 41. I was the quiet kid at school. Bully had been especially annoying to me that day. At lunch, he yelled something to me. I walked up to him and slapped him across his face. His face instantly became red, and he jumped at me and tackled me to the ground. I shook him off, then shoved him into the wall. After that, he didn't mess with me. Story 42. One bully was whispering insults at me for about 5 minutes. I tried to ignore him, but at one point I yelled, "Shut up!" The teacher ended up getting mad at me for saying that. DX. Story 43. There was a girl who always called me dumb or stupid, for really no reason, from elementary school all the way to high school. Until one day, I finally told her that if she had nothing nice to say, then don't say anything at all. She was quiet after that and stopped doing it. Years later now, I think she maybe liked me in some weird way.